Laura stood frozen at the entrance of the stark hospital room, her breath catching as her world collapsed in a single instant. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead, but the sound was drowned by the pounding of her heart. The doctor's eyes softened, and with the weight of those words, "I'm sorry. We did all we could," Laura's knees buckled beneath her. She whispered, "No, this can't be real," her voice cracking into silence as the walls of the sterile room closed in on her. She stumbled forward, reaching for the still hand of her best friend Daniel, his face peaceful but unbearably distant. Memories surged in her mind. Laughter under the summer sun, secrets whispered late at night, promises of forever, and now all of it shattered. Laura clung to Daniel's lifeless hand as tears streaked her cheeks, her body trembling under the unbearable truth. The world outside still moved, cars passing, people laughing, life continuing. But for Laura, time had stopped in this room. Every part of her screamed to wake up, to undo the moment, to have one last chance to say the words left unspoken. Laura's cries echoed in the emptiness of her apartment that night, where shadows stretched long across the walls. She whispered Daniel's name again and again, as if repeating it might tether him back to life. The silence answered with cruelty. Her phone buzzed with messages of condolences, but she couldn't bear to read them. Each vibration felt like a reminder of a world moving forward without him. She curled on the couch, holding the hoodie Daniel once left behind, its fabric worn and faintly smelling of his cologne. The city outside glowed with neon and headlights, but inside her world was nothing but darkness. She muttered, "I should have seen the signs. I should have known." The guilt pressed on her chest like iron, suffocating. She imagined all the moments she missed, every unspoken pain Daniel must have hidden, every smile that might have masked despair. The questions devoured her. Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't I push harder? Her tears blurred the ceiling lights above, until exhaustion claimed her into restless, haunted sleep. The next morning, Laura sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of untouched coffee. Steam curled upward, fading into the air like fleeting memories. Her reflection in the window was hollow, her eyes bloodshot and swollen. She thought of the last conversation with Daniel, replaying it until the words twisted into knives. "I'm fine," he had said, smiling faintly. Now that smile felt like a mask, and the truth carved into her chest. Laura whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" But her own voice sounded foreign. The calendar on the wall still showed plans they had written together, a trip, a concert, dreams scrawled in messy handwriting. Now those dates mocked her, empty and unreachable. A knock at the door startled her, but she didn't move. She knew it was family, friends, people wanting to comfort her. But what could they say? Words could not fill the void left by Daniel's absence. She stared at the door, unmoving, letting silence be her answer. Laura forced herself to attend the small gathering, arranged by Daniel's parents. The living room was filled with hushed voices, distant relatives, and framed photos of Daniel smiling. Each picture pierced her like glass, every captured moment mocking the reality of his absence. She stood apart from the crowd, hands trembling as she traced a photo of him at 16, laughing on a beach. People whispered platitudes around her. "He's in a better place now. Time heals everything." Each phrase felt hollow, empty, distant from her raw grief. Daniel's mother embraced her tightly, sobbing into her shoulder, and Laura whispered, "I'm so sorry," though the words felt powerless. The air was heavy with grief, the sound of tissues rustling, people stifling cries. For Laura, the room blurred into background noise, her vision narrowing only to the images of her friend's life. She wanted to scream to shatter the quiet, but instead she stood still, silently breaking inside. Late that night, Laura sat at her desk, laptop open, staring at Daniel's social media profile. His posts were filled with smiling photos, witty comments, and encouragements to others. Now every word felt like a puzzle she failed to solve. Friends posted tributes, pouring grief into the comment section, writing messages addressed to him as though he could still read them. Laura whispered to the screen. You didn't have to go through this alone. She scrolled endlessly, searching for hidden signs in his posts, something she might have missed. A laugh here, a smile there, yet behind it all was silence, the kind she now knew had been unbearable for him. She typed a message but deleted it, her fingers hovering over the keys. Finally, she closed the laptop, darkness flooding the room. She pressed her forehead against the desk, tears falling as she muttered, I should've been there. I should've saved you. The funeral was held under a gray sky that seemed to mirror Laura's heart. Raindrops tapped against the umbrella she clutched, her fingers numb as she followed the crowd toward the rows of headstones. The pastor's voice echoed softly, offering words of comfort, but they barely registered in her mind. Laura's gaze was fixed on the coffin, its dark wood gleaming under the drizzle, each droplet rolling down like the tears she could not contain. Friends and family huddled together, their faces pale with grief, yet Laura felt alone, as though the world had abandoned her in this moment. Daniel's mother wept uncontrollably, leaning against his father for support, while Laura whispered, You shouldn't be here. You were supposed to live. The cold air stung her lungs, and she wished she could stop time, keep the coffin above ground forever. As the first clumps of earth hit the polished surface, Laura's body shook, the finality of it crushing her. Later that evening, Laura sat quietly in the corner of Daniel's parents' living room. The house smelled faintly of candles and wilted flowers, a reminder of the day's sorrow. People filled the space with murmurs of sympathy, their words soft and rehearsed. Laura forced herself to nod when spoken to, though every phrase felt like a weight pressing deeper into her chest. She avoided the food spread across the table, untouched sandwiches and lukewarm tea. Her eyes lingered on Daniel's framed photographs arranged neatly on the mantel, his smile radiating through each image. A relative patted her shoulder, saying, Hell always be with us. But Laura could only think not like this. Her heart screamed to leave, yet her legs felt rooted to the chair. She whispered to herself, I don't know how to do this, gripping her knees tightly as though holding herself together. In the silence of her own apartment, Laura found herself drowning in isolation. She sat on the floor surrounded by memories, photographs, ticket stubs, letters scribbled with inside jokes. Each item felt like a relic of a world that no longer existed. She held a Polaroid of her and Daniel, laughing at a summer festival, his arms slung around her shoulders. The image stabbed at her chest, and she pressed it to her lips, whispering, You should still be here. Her phone chimed with messages from friends, urging her to eat, to rest, to reach out, but she ignored them all. The world demanded she heal, but her heart demanded she stay with the grief. She curled up against the wall, clutching Daniel's old hoodie, her sobs muffled into the fabric. The weight of loneliness wrapped around her like chains, and she wondered if the pain would ever loosen its grip. Laura walked through the city streets the next morning, her body moving but her spirit hollow. Crowds bustled past her, their chatter blending with the sound of traffic, yet none of it reached her heart. She felt like a ghost among the living, unseen and untouched. The shop windows reflected smiling faces, bright colors, promises of normalcy, while she carried only emptiness. She paused near a cafe, where she and Daniel once met after classes, memories rushing like a storm. She could almost hear his laugh echoing from inside, but the tables were filled with strangers. Her chest tightened as she whispered, I can't do this without you, her voice drowned by city noise. People brushed past her impatiently, unaware of her private collapse. She leaned against a cold brick wall, closing her eyes, tears slipping silently, wishing the world would stop spinning for just a moment. At night, Laura sat by her bedroom window, staring out at the city lights blinking in the distance. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the street lamps. She thought of Daniel's laughter, his voice, the way he could always calm her storms. Now, silence filled the spaces where he should have been. She whispered, You should have told me. I would have listened. I would have stayed up all night if you asked. The guilt pressed harder, whispering that she had failed him, that she should have seen the signs. Her breath hitched as she imagined his last moments, the loneliness he must have felt, and it tore her apart. She wrapped herself in a blanket, shivering though the room was warm. The night stretched endlessly, and Laura felt as though she were adrift in an ocean of grief, searching for a shore that refused to appear. Laura sat on the floor surrounded by scattered photographs, each one pulling her into memories she both cherished and dreaded. She picked up an old snapshot of her and Daniel as children, running barefoot in the backyard with laughter frozen in time. The sunlight in the picture felt like a lie now, mocking her with the brightness he once carried. She whispered, "You were always there, weren't you? Every summer, every storm." The smell of grass and the sound of cicadas came rushing back, vivid enough to make her chest ache. She remembered scraped knees healed by his teasing words, and the way his grin could chase away the darkest clouds. Now she stared at the photograph until her tears blurred their smiling faces into smudges of color. She pressed the photo to her chest, her voice cracking. "You promised we'd never drift apart." The silence answered cruelly, reminding her promises had no meaning against death. Laura leaned back against her couch, clutching an old yearbook, flipping pages covered with scribbles and inside jokes. Daniel's handwriting leapt off the page, bold and messy with his note. "We'll conquer the world together." She traced the letters with trembling fingers, whispering, "You really meant it, didn't you?" She remembered long afternoons in the library, the two of them pretending to study while trading secrets about their fears and dreams. His laugh echoed in her ears, the sound of safety and belonging. She closed her eyes and felt the weight of those days, how he had been her anchor through storms she thought she couldn't survive. Yet now, the anchor was gone, leaving her adrift in a sea of regret. Her tears dotted the yearbook pages, smearing ink into blurred rivers of memory. She pressed the book to her forehead and whispered, "I'd give anything to go back." In her dreamlike memory, Laura saw herself and Daniel sitting on the hood of his old car, stars glimmering above them. They were teenagers then, talking about the future with reckless certainty. Daniel had said, "One day, we'll leave this town. We'll find something better." She had laughed, brushing her hair out of her face, replying, "We'll take on the world, just the two of us." The night air had smelled of gasoline and damp earth, but she had never felt safer. Now that memory played like a movie, she could never pause, only watch helplessly. The way Daniel had looked at the stars, eyes full of dreams, cut deeper now because those dreams would never come true. Laura whispered, "You should have had the chance to find your better." She hugged her knees to her chest, grief crashing against her like endless waves. Laura sat at her desk with a shoebox of letters and notes exchanged over the years. She pulled out one, Daniel's handwriting hurried but familiar. "Don't ever doubt yourself. You're stronger than you know." Her throat tightened as she whispered, "Why couldn't you believe the same for yourself?" She remembered the night he had slipped the note into her locker after she had failed an exam, his grin wide as he teased her into laughing. He had always been her strength when she faltered, but now she realized she never asked if he had someone to be his. The thought hollowed her. Her hands trembled as she pressed the note against her heart, as though clinging to his words could undo reality. She said, "You saved me more times than I can count, but I couldn't save you." The guilt swallowed her like a shadow she couldn't escape. That night, Laura lay in bed staring at the ceiling, memories colliding like waves against her fragile mind. She saw Daniel's grin, his eyes alive with mischief, his voice calling her name. Every echo felt like a dagger twisting inside her. She whispered, "You're everywhere and nowhere." She remembered their late-night phone calls, their laughter spilling into dawn, the way he always told her, "Well, figure it out." The memory brought both warmth and unbearable sorrow. She turned to the empty side of the bed, pretending for a moment that he was there, whispering some silly joke to calm her storm. But all she found was silence pressing against her chest. Tears slipped down her cheeks as exhaustion pulled her under, carrying her into restless sleep filled with fragments of Daniel's voice. The absence was louder than his presence had ever been. Laura sat at her desk late into the night, scrolling through old text messages with Daniel. Each line felt like a thread leading her back to the moment she could have noticed. "I'm fine," he had written so often, words now soaked in hidden meaning. She whispered, "Why didn't I push harder?" Her thumb hovered over a message she never answered, one where he said he felt tired. It wasn't unusual then, but now it tore her apart. She buried her face in her hands, her heart screaming with guilt. She thought of the countless nights she could have called, could have asked, could have been there. Instead, she let the silence stretch, and now silence was all she had left. Her tears fell onto the phone screen, blurring the words, as she muttered, "I failed you when it mattered most." The next morning, Laura argued with her mother on the phone, her voice breaking. Her mother pleaded gently, "You couldn't have known." But Laura snapped, "I should have. He was my best friend." She paced the kitchen floor, her movements frantic, knocking a mug from the counter. The shatter echoed through the room like a cruel reminder of broken things. Her mother's silence lingered on the line, unable to soothe her daughter's spiral. Laura's chest heaved as she whispered, "I should have saved him." She slammed the phone down and slid to the floor, hands clutching her head. The guilt consumed her, whispering that love wasn't enough, that she had failed in the one role that mattered most. Laura sat on the bathroom floor, knees pulled to her chest, her reflection in the mirror fractured by streaks of condensation. She whispered to herself, "You should have seen it. You should have noticed." Her face was pale, eyes swollen from hours of tears. The guilt played his last moments in her mind like a haunting reel, Daniel alone, lost, unreachable. She imagined him calling out for help she never gave. The thought made her stomach churn, her breath shallow, her hands trembling violently. She pressed her forehead to the cold tile, hoping it would numb the ache inside. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint drip of a faucet. She opened Daniel's old notebook, one he left behind after a study session, filled with doodles and half-finished sentences. Some words struck like knives. "Sometimes it feels too heavy." Laura's chest tightened as she whispered, "You told me, and I didn't listen." She slammed the notebook shut, tears blurring her vision. Her hands shook as she pressed it against her chest, guilt gnawing at her ribs. The weight of missed opportunities and overlooked signs suffocated her. She wondered if she had been too focused on her own world to see his. The thought stabbed until she gasped for air. That night, Laura stood before Daniel's grave again, the cemetery cloaked in silence under the moon. She whispered, "I should have saved you. I should have been enough." The words cracked the night air, raw and fragile. She knelt, tracing his name on the cold stone, her body trembling. The guilt bled into every syllable, each one heavier than the last. She pressed her forehead to the stone, her tears soaking the grass beneath. The night wind brushed her hair, carrying the echo of her confession into the dark. For Laura, it felt like punishment, an endless cycle of regret with no escape. Laura sat across from Daniel's childhood friend, Michael, who had tears glistening in his eyes. He admitted softly, "He told me once he felt invisible." Laura's chest tightened, and she whispered, "He never told me that." Michael nodded, guilt heavy on his face. The revelation crushed her with the weight of truths she never knew, secrets Daniel had hidden even from her. She replayed their years together and wondered how much of him she had really seen. Each revelation was another fracture in her heart, another reminder that even love sometimes wasn't enough to pierce the darkness someone carried. Back in her apartment, Laura discovered a hidden journal Daniel had left behind in a box of his belongings. Her hands trembled as she flipped through pages filled with thoughts he never shared aloud. "I feel like I'm drowning," one entry read. Tears blurred the ink as she whispered, "You were fighting a war I couldn't see." Every line was a window into his hidden torment, every scribble a scream for help he buried deep. She closed the journal and clutched it to her chest, torn between anger and unbearable sorrow. Laura confronted Daniel's sister, Anna, desperate for answers. Anna's voice trembled as she revealed, "He struggled more than any of us knew. He hid it well." Laura felt her knees weaken, whispering, "Why didn't he tell me?" Anna's tears fell freely as she admitted, "He didn't want to burden you." The truth cut Laura deeper than any blade. She realized his silence wasn't mistrust but sacrifice, his attempt to protect her from his pain. That realization shattered her all over again, for it meant he suffered alone while she lived unaware. At night, Laura replayed every moment where Daniel had laughed, wondering how many of those smiles were masks. She whispered, "You were hiding in plain sight." The thought drove her to anger, grief, and heartbreak all at once. She slammed her fists into her pillow, screaming into it until her throat ached. The revelation that he had shielded her from his pain made her both love and resent him. She muttered, "You should have trusted me with your darkness." The room felt smaller with each breath, as though the walls pressed in with the weight of unspoken truths. Laura returned to the cemetery, holding the journal close to her chest. She whispered, "I know now. You were carrying battles you never shared." Her tears fell freely as she knelt at his grave, the truth pressing heavily on her shoulders. She laid the journal against the stone, a final gesture of acknowledgement, her way of saying she finally saw the depth of his hidden suffering. Her voice cracked as she muttered, "I'm sorry I couldn't carry it with you." The night air was still, as though the world paused for her confession, and for a brief moment she felt connected to him again, bound by truth and grief. Laura sat across from her therapist in a quiet office, the air scented faintly of lavender. She hesitated before whispering, "I can't forgive myself." The therapist listened patiently, her calm eyes steady as she encouraged, "Start with the truth. Say what hurts." Laura took a trembling breath, admitting, "I feel like I failed him." The words felt heavy, but speaking them aloud gave them shape, no longer just shadows in her chest. Her therapist nodded gently, reminding her that grief could not be measured in blame. Laura's tears spilled freely, but for the first time she felt the faintest relief, as though the burden was shared. Later that evening, Laura sat with her friend Sarah, who offered her a steaming cup of tea. Sarah said gently, "You don't have to do this alone." Laura's voice cracked as she replied, "I don't know how to keep going." Sarah reached across the table, holding her hand firmly. "One day at a time," she said, her eyes steady with warmth. For the first time since Daniel's death, Laura let herself lean into another's support. She realized her grief didn't need to be endured in isolation, that love still surrounded her, even in the shadows of loss. The weight eased slightly, like the first crack of light through a storm. Walking through a quiet park at sunset, Laura breathed deeply, the air cool against her cheeks. She whispered to herself, "I'm still here." Birds chirped softly, and the sky burned with orange and violet hues. She remembered how Daniel once loved sunsets, always pointing out their fleeting beauty. For the first time, instead of despair, she felt a flicker of connection, his memory living within the colors above her. She closed her eyes and whispered, "This is for you." A calm spread through her chest, fragile but real. Healing, she realized, was not forgetting, but carrying him with her in the light. Laura sat at her desk, writing a letter addressed to Daniel. Her hand trembled, but the words poured onto the page. "I miss you. I forgive you. I hope you found peace." She folded the letter gently and placed it in a small box with his photos and keepsakes. She whispered, "This doesn't end us. You'll always be with me." Closing the box felt like a step forward, not away, a way to honor him without being consumed by grief. For the first time, her heart didn't feel entirely broken, only scarred, but still beating. At a small community support group, Laura introduced herself softly, "My name is Laura, and I lost my best friend." The circle of strangers nodded with quiet understanding. She felt her throat tighten, but as she shared her story, the weight on her chest began to lift. Tears streamed, yet they were met with compassion, not silence. She realized grief was a language others spoke too, and she was not alone in its storm. Leaving the group, she felt lighter, as though she had found a place where her pain was not a burden but a bridge. Laura visited Daniel's parents, bringing flowers. His mother embraced her tightly, whispering, "He loved you more than you know." Tears filled Laura's eyes as she replied, "I just hope he knew I loved him too." They sat together, sharing stories of Daniel's childhood, their laughter and tears intertwining. Laura realized grief wasn't only hers, it was shared, softened by community. For the first time she felt the possibility of remembering him with warmth instead of only pain. Laura stood in her apartment, framing a photograph of her and Daniel, laughing at a summer fair. She placed it gently on the shelf, surrounded by books and candles. She whispered, "You're still here, just in a different way." Instead of tears, she felt warmth spreading through her chest. She lit a small candle, the flame flickering against the glass frame. It was no longer only grief, it was love preserved, transformed into memory. She smiled faintly, a fragile yet genuine expression. In a meadow outside town, Laura released a lantern into the night sky. She whispered, "For you, Daniel. Always." The lantern drifted upward, its glow merging with stars above. Watching it vanish, she felt her grief shift, still painful, but no longer unbearable. Instead, it carried hope, like a message carried beyond her reach. She pressed her hands together in silent prayer, letting the wind cool her tears. For the first time, she felt peace. Back at home, Laura sat with her love interest, James, who gently wrapped his arm around her shoulders. She whispered, "I don't think the pain will ever leave." James replied softly, "It doesn't, but neither does the love." Laura leaned against him, her body trembling with both sorrow and comfort. She realized grief and love were threads of the same fabric, and both would remain part of her. For the first time she allowed herself to imagine a future where healing and love could coexist with memory. On the anniversary of Daniel's passing, Laura returned to his grave with fresh flowers. She knelt, placing them gently, and whispered, "I'll carry you with me, always." Her voice was steady, her tears soft, but not overwhelming. She traced his name on the stone one last time, and smiled faintly through the sadness. The pain remained, but so did the love. As she stood, sunlight broke through clouds, bathing the cemetery in golden light. Laura walked away slowly, carrying both grief and peace, her journey not over, but transformed.